So welcome, my wonderful participants, to the Roman Villa Sock Zoom. The purpose of this is to give you lots of tips, trips, information, anything that you could possibly need in order to make our third installment of the second annual Summer Sock Club, Socks, a little more easy to follow and to do. And it also gives people a chance to ask some questions, and we have a great one already that we will be answering a little later into the Zoom. So the inspiration for these socks is actually the Roman Villa shawl that I designed a few years ago. And the Roman Villa shawl came from a strong interest of mine, which is archaeology. And I have some, unfortunately, not as much use as I would like degrees in archaeology. And I'm very, very interested in Romans. And particularly, I got into the whole Roman villas in England and the Roman occupation there in terms of an interest. And so this shawl and the further socks are inspired by actual Roman villas, and in particular the mosaics that they would have in there. So Romans had a lot of mosaics in their wealthier homes and villas, and villas themselves were considered to be like the epitome of life. This is where you live your best life. And so they did a lot of decorating. They would have a lot of fancy paintings on the walls if they could afford it. They would have a lot of mosaics on the floors. And the mosaics could actually be part of a house that might be used for 100 to 200 to 300 years. And it would just pass down through the generations and often be built on top of. So the shawl and the socks include elements from mosaics that you would have actually seen. So the types of shapes that they have in the mosaic. And then the original color in the shawl and the socks is actually drawn from the most popular colors used in Roman mosaics in the floors and so on. You'll also find the cherry red, burgundy, whatever you want to call it, color. It shows up a lot in like wall frescoes and paintings, and you can see quite a bit of that in some of the fancy houses from Pompeii. So all of the elements in the socks and the shawl were designed from Roman villas, and the shape of the shawl itself actually emulates a larger villa with its arms and this sort of shaping that would grow up over time as a house would expand to have more and more functions. And things like the birds in these socks, those are actually, Romans like to do a lot of wildlife in their mosaic work, and you'll see a lot of birds in there. And then you see all sorts of like wavy patterns. So the twisting ribbons are an idea that's based off of a lot of the twisting shapes in mosaics, and the same thing with the key. And then the striping was drawn from the edges that they would put around frescoes. So they would paint false window frames, for example, or they might have some moldings as well. But the idea was that your wall was painted as if you either had windows with window moldings around them, or you might have paintings with frames around them, but it was all painted on. So that's where the idea for the stripes and that sort of texture came from. And then the texture stitch that's in the background of the shawl and the socks is actually drawn from the little blocks of stone in mosaics that are called tesserae. So that's the plural of a tesserae. They're little cubes, and the stitch pattern forms sort of a little bit of a blocky shape in it. So that's why I used that particular texture. So it's a fun pattern because it definitely draws on a lot of history. And you'll find a little teeny bit of that in the romance for the pattern on the first page. But the shawl has a lot more in it in terms of like actual bits of historical information. They didn't go into the socks because the pattern was very long. And our concern is that we don't want to make you print off a lot of extra pages if you're a person like me who likes to work from paper. So I'm going to change cameras, and that will give us the chance to start looking at. And I am now going to make sure that this records properly by spotlighting this for you all. So that'll be, if you've got this particular view going on your Zoom, you'll now see this as the larger window. So these are the socks, and we're going to go through the whole pattern and talk about all of the sections, things to look out for in the socks, and some ways to troubleshoot, to customize the fit, and so on. Due to the fact that there are charts for a lot of the sections in the sock, the sizing on the socks themselves is based off of numbers that can work with the charts. And the very first thing that I'll mention to you is that in the size medium, large, and extra large for the socks, there will be small number changes of stitches between the different sections here and there. It's clearly listed as to what to do to change your number of stitches. And then I do have a table that I'll show you in a moment in the pattern to just help you be aware of the fact that it will change periodically. It's charted so that you don't have weird breaks in between the motifs in your sock. But like I say, in order to get the charts to work properly, For example, in the twisting ribbons in the size medium, you need to lose a stitch at the beginning to have the math work out, and then you need to add one at the end. So it's very, very simple to change the number of stitches, but I just want everyone making this sock to be aware that unless it's the size small, you will have the odd little place here and there that you have to change the number of stitches for one of the charts. So let's have a look at the pattern itself here. So the pattern starts off with a nice picture of Amanda's feet because they fit her better than they do me. And our romance here that gives you a little bit of the inspiration. And then we start off with page 2 where we have things like finished measurements, gauge, and things like that. Gauge is fairly important if you want your size to match, but it's also something you can play with to change the sizing on the socks just a little bit. Sorry, I had a hand up here for myself. So you can tweak this in some various different ways to fit you. And I wanted to start off by talking about that. So there are 4 sizes built into the sock pattern: small, medium, large, and extra large. And you can change the sizing a little bit by changing the gauge of your sock. So for example, for me, I normally like a sock that takes 56 stitches. So all of the sizes in here will be slightly too large for me. And one way to deal with that would be to drop my needle size, which would tighten up the knitting. And then we can get into things like, oh my goodness, what if it's not big enough? And if it's not big enough, that's where you could, at least on the leg of the sock, increase the needle size in order to just kind of tweak that gauge a little bit there too. In general, on the feet, there's an issue in that if you knit them too loosely, they can be very rough on the feet. They're kind of scratchy then. And the other thing is that socks tend to wear out faster if your feet are knit loosely. So in general there, what I would do if I was knitting for somebody who was past the 76 stitch size, I would probably throw a few extra stitches in that would fall on the sole of the foot, just so that I would have that extra ease without changing my gauge. So in general, the pattern will give you information for all of the sizes, but there are a few little cheat things in here to just help you remember stuff. So this chart that's at the bottom of page 2 is just a reminder of the stitch count for each of the main sections in the leg of the sock. And it will let you know at a glance if you're going to have any changes in the section to your stitch count. So the stitch count all starts off like it is at the beginning here with the ribbing. So you have 60, 66 stitches, 70, and 76. And then you can look down your column and see if there's going to be any changes to the stitch count in other sections of the leg of the sock. You don't have to worry about this in the foot. There's no issues there. There's no stitch count changes. But in the leg, in order to fit into our charts properly, there are the odd ones. So for example, in the size medium, you can see on the twisting ribbons, we go down a stitch. You can see on size large, we go down a stitch for the birds. And there will be instructions to put that stitch back at the end of each of these sections so that you don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, what does this do to the math for the heels, etc. So there is a change periodically in the stitch count on some of the sizes. This will give you at a glance where it's going to happen, but it is specifically listed in each section as well. So that's very important to understand, because that will help you understand why in certain places in the pattern, you will see different sizes broken out with different instructions from the other sizes. And that will relate to what you need to do in terms of the stitch count. So take them away, add them in. It'll tell you what to do for each size. The next question that I get asked a lot about things with mosaic is this like a stranded colorwork sock in that there's not a lot of elasticity and I have to watch my sizing because of that? With stranded colorwork socks, you often have to go up a size from what you're normally used to wearing, because in order to get it over your heel, you need that sock to be a bit looser so that you can actually pass it over the heel. The good news is with mosaic, it's still very elastic and stretchy. So don't automatically go up a size in this sock just because there is what looks like stranded colorwork. Mosaic is very, very elastic. It doesn't pull in the way that stranded colorwork does, and so it's not going to affect the size of the sock and the ability of it to go over your heel. So there's nothing in this sock that will restrict you in any way. It's nice and easy to knit, much easier than it is to knit stranded color work, because you're only going to ever work with one color at a time in here, and you're not having to carry a second one at the same time, which again means that they're much more elastic. So that's a nice little trick about that too. So you don't want to have to change the size just because there's something that looks like color work there. Now, customizing the sock. If you have the kit, you are well off in terms of colors. There are yarn amounts if you don't have the kit and want to use stash, and that's no problem. But I have had the odd person say, well, I don't want to use 5 colors. There are ways to customize the sock in order to avoid using 5 colors. great way to deal with this is like all those pieces that we have left over from other patterns. They can help us to get our extra colors. But if you wanted to reduce the number of colors, you absolutely positively have to have one light and one dark so that you get contrast in here. You could knit the entire sock in 2 colors, which would just give you bands of mosaic, and then you would have the light color in between. So it can be done with going down to 2 colors. You can go down to 4 colors by eliminating this color here, the gold, and just using one of your other colors. So you could use blue through that section as well. And in the heel where you've got a gold stripe, you would just put another stripe of the background color in. So you can play with the colors. And I give you full permission as the designer of this sock to do that, because I am one of those people who like to customize patterns a little bit for my own self. So if you want to change the colors, it's quite easy to do it. Just pay attention to the amount of yarn used in each of those sections, because if you had one blue mini skein, that will do your pair of socks for these 2 bands, but it will not give you enough yarn to do this section on both socks as well. So you would have to do something in order to have enough yarn in whatever color you chose to substitute. So I hope that makes sense, but it is something that sometimes we don't want to go and buy a kit or additional mini skeins or what have you. We want to use stash yarn. So yes, you can customize it. You just have to make sure you, at a minimum, you have a light and a dark so that you have contrast in your mosaic sections. So very important to do that. Aside from that, you have my permission to play with the colors. All right, so eliminating different colors. Also, you can tailor this sock and customize it to make it less busy or easier if you choose to. There are some really obvious things that you can do to make the sock a little bit less fussy. So if you're like me and you like knitting all sorts of different styles of things, this is a great sock. If you want to make it easier for yourself, again, this is a really easy band to eliminate. You could just knit this as garter. With these key bands and bird bands, you could also eliminate the mosaic and just do garter stripes if you want, and it would still look very pretty. So you can simplify the sock by taking out the chart and just knitting stripes. And here you could just do garter stitch if you wanted, or stocking stitch in a separate color. The other thing that you could do is take this tesserae stitch that's here, and you could use it in place of this band here as well. So there's lots of things that you can do to simplify them a little bit if you're feeling overwhelmed by the idea of twisted stitches and mosaic. And again, as the designer, I give you full permission, if you are a beginner knitter, to do that. There's no reason why you cannot make this sock your own. In the foot, if you wanted to simplify it, you could take out the twisted stitch on the arch of the foot and just make that a plain stocking stitch section. So lots of things that you can do to simplify it, and lots of things that you can do to customize the colors if you prefer not to work with the original 5. Myself, I think the 5 colors adds a lot of fun and variety, and it keeps me interested in the knitting, but like I say, different strokes for different folks. Now, you can also change the length of the leg on this sock. This one's a little taller than some, and some of us like long socks, and some of us go, oh no, the horror of it all, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. You can shorten the leg of this sock by eliminating a band. So you could drop this section here, which would shorten the sock up by about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. You could drop part of the gold section, so you could eliminate the garter rows at the beginning and end. There's no reason why you can't do that. They're just there because they're pretty, and the original pattern started the twisting ribbons with garter rows and ended them with garter rows. So you could drop out those 8 rows, which would again shorten it by about 3/4 of an inch, little over 1 centimeter. If you want to shorten it even more, take out the entire gold band, maybe just put a couple of rows of garter in there in the gold to separate the 2 mosaics. And you can also drop one of the mosaic bands too. So if you don't want to put all of the mosaic in, get rid of the one you don't like the most, and then you can have a shorter sock leg. You could also shorten the cuff of the sock. It's my standard length of cuff, but that doesn't mean that you have to knit it the same way I did. The other thing that you can do is you can change the number of stitches or the needle size to make the leg bigger and the foot smaller, or vice versa. So if you have a narrow foot and a wider calf, choose a larger size for the leg, and when you get into the decreases on your gusset, just decrease it down more than you would otherwise to get down to the smaller size. So you can change the size from the leg to the foot, or vice versa. If you have a thin ankle and you have a larger foot, which is really common for a lot of men, my husband's one of them, what I would do for him is I'll knit the size that's going to fit his ankle, and then I will not decrease as much here and go to a bigger size on the foot. You can also play with changing needle sizes. So you can change the needle size to change the gauge a little bit and customize the fit a little bit there. So we have a question in the chat, which is actually a really good one. Let me call that up. And it says, what is the length of the leg heel to flap without changes approximately? This used to be in the pattern and it looks like we cut it out. So I'm going to measure it for you right now. I have a measuring tape right beside me. And so to the heel flap, it's 18 centimeters or just over 7 inches. This is going to be consistent from size to size to size because the number of rows doesn't change in the size. It's just how wide is the leg. So 18 centimeters or just over 7 inches is the length of the leg. It's very common that socks are knit to 5 to 6 inches in the leg, which is why I do mention this one is just a bit taller than some that you'll see. So something to consider, and that's one of the reasons why, having had a few people drop into the studio and say, I don't like a tall sock, what can I do? I wanted to bring it up. And we'll talk some more later on as well, but the length of the foot on this sock is a standard, like longer medium size, but some of us have feet that are longer than this and some of us have feet that are shorter. So for example, a friend of mine has a size 4E foot. For her, this sock is massively too long. So I want to talk about what you can do in order to solve that problem. And that is, in a nutshell, what you're going to do is you're going to try the sock on, or you're going to have measured the person's foot so you can then measure the length of the sock and see where you need to begin your toe. And you can always stop the patterning here at any point and start your toe decreases so that you can customize the length of the sock. If your foot is longer than this, and I believe this one was like a size 7.5 foot for length, you can add more here before you go and start your toe decreases. So for someone with a long foot, you might want to add more rows here. And if you have one of the kits, we have built in enough yarn that you can add several inches onto the foot of the sock and not run out of yarn from your kit. So lots of things that you can do to customize the length of the foot there. If your foot is shorter, you may end up losing some of the bands in here. But again, there are things that you can do to put the look back in, even if you're doing the decreases. So customizing the sock is important because something that looks as complicated as this is sometimes not as obvious in terms of how do I make this fit me better. So we've looked at the length of the leg and the foot and talking about you can just mix and match sizes a little bit between the leg and the foot thanks to the heel flap construction. So I should have probably started off with this. It is knit from the top down. It has a heel flap, and then it has a normal, very standard wedge toe. That's something, by the way, if you like a different type of toe, this sock is quite easy to substitute a different toe in there. You could do an asymmetric toe, a star toe, anything that you like. In the heel, you can customize the size of the heel flap. And yes, there would be ways to do things like an afterthought heel, for example. So you wouldn't do the heel flap, you would just dive into the foot and leave this positioning for your afterthought heel and do that later. We don't have time to talk about actually how to do an afterthought heel on this, but it is something that the sock is fairly amenable to do. So for experienced knitters who want to change out the toes and the heels, you can do that. And again, I give you lots of permission to do that. All right. Let's start looking through the pattern and look for anything else that I think that I want to bring to your attention. So there are lots of notes in the pattern that do remind you of some of the things that I've just said here. So for example, you can change the striping on the toe if you've added extra length, and there's some extra yarn in your yarn kits and that sort of thing. There's some other things in here I want to draw your attention to as well, and there's tips to help you make the sock tidier. So the first one that comes up in here is when you're working your mosaic charts or small stripes, twist the 2 colors in use at the end of each round to prevent holes or gaps. When we look at the back of the sock, this is where our end of row is, and we don't want a great big hole showing between color changes, which can happen when you're knitting in the round and you go from one color to the other. So what I do is I actually take my yarn, and when I go to start the next round, I will take the working color. So if I was doing the second row of red, I will just bring it up and around the white and then just knit my second row in this. And the purpose of that is it catches the white. When you get to the next row where you're changing color, you give the white a little tug to tighten that whole area up, and it holds it snug so you're not getting holes in the back of your sock. So the seam is almost invisible, and in this one it runs right here. But by doing that little trick of crossing the strands, every time, or twisting them together every time that you change color when you go along the back. Obviously, you don't do it in a single color. That will just keep it nice and snug, and you're not going to end up with a section that you have little holes in, because you absolutely, when you're knitting mosaic in the round, could have that issue. It's a little trick that's used in intarsia to keep a hole from forming an intarsia, and it's exactly the same thing. Just twist the strands around each other and keep on going. And as you change colors every 2 rows, you just give the next strand a little bit of a pull to tighten it up, and you will be just fine. What does that look like on the inside? What it gives you is a little vertical line that you can see, and I'll lift this up so we can see it a little bit closer. It's not going to rub on your foot any more than the mosaic does, or leg rather, so it's not a problem in that. But this is where you have that little cross, and you just get that nice little line on the inside. So what that is just twisting the strands in between each pair of rows. So each time you do a round, you're catching the other color to just carry it up. So that's what that does. And we can see that on the back of the birds as well. So you can just see this little bit of a line from twisting the strands. And like I say, it's a nice little tip. Anytime that you're striping socks and you're going from one color to the other, twist the strands, and that helps to fill in any possibilities of having a gap. So that's a nice little tip that I wanted to make sure is in the pattern so that you know about it and can remember to do that when you get to your mosaic. On the next page, page 3, there's another little table that I have for you here, because it's super easy to forget how many stitches are in your heel flap and how many stitches are set for the instep, because on some of the sizes, they are not the same. The reasoning for this is that if your heel flap is really, really wide, the sock is going to fit less well. And then this is also setting you up so that your instep works well with the instep patterning, so the charts for the instep. So there is a little bit of a difference on 3 of the sizes between the number of stitches that are used for the heel flap and the number of stitches that are used for the instep. So it's the medium and the large that have a difference there. The small and the extra large are the same. So on those in-between sizes, we just don't want too wide a heel flap, because then it starts to get into where your ankle bones are on the side, and you can get some friction there. So I prefer to keep my heel flap a little bit restrained in places. Heel flaps can be adjusted. You can make them wider if you want, and it's not going to be a problem. You just need to make sure that when you get into your decrease section, that you start working towards having that as your instep once you're done all your decreases, so that the charts that follow on will fit. The next thing is, there is a note here about check your desired foot length before you work the geometric flower chart. So the geometric flower sits on the top of your foot. And annoyingly, the camera is not picking it up as well as it could. There we go. Yay for auto cameras. So if you have a really short foot, you may need to start decreasing for the toe before you're finished the chart. And that would be my friend with her size 4E foot. Or you might want to do it right after. And so this note is telling you to check that. And when you get to the point where you need to decrease for your toe, no matter what's happening in the rest of the sock, you're going to jump to the toe instructions and start doing your toe. So this is where I was going to talk about what you can do if you're going to lose this band. So if you have a small foot, you may not be able to get this band onto your sock, because then the sock would be too long, and who wants that rumpled up bulk in the toe? So you're going to lose this band, but what you can do to just give you some of those nice stripes is, as you decrease for your toe, you can put in stripes in this section. It won't have exactly the same patterning, but you can do that. Or if you're an experienced knitter, you can take part of the chart and put it onto there. The thing is that because there's garter in this chart, I don't think I would want that right over the joints of my toes themselves. What on earth is happening here? Well, that was interesting. I've never had it do that before, so I'm just going to do a little fixing on that. But it's definitely important when you do your sock. And we're going to switch back to the other camera. It's important when you do your sock to make sure, okay, that should be fixed now. Make sure that you get your toe decreases where you need them, not where the pattern says. Okay, no picture. Yeah. Technology, I tell you, it's a much better camera than the built-in ones, but yeah. Exciting bookshelves, back to not being zoomed in. So there must be a hand gesture that controls that, and it's nowhere in the manual, of course. Anyway, back to page 3. So I want you to make sure that you check the length of your sock and know that you can skip to the toe wherever you need to. You can put stripes on that toe if you want the effect here, but I would probably just keep them in stocking stitch just to make sure that you don't have the joints of your toes being rubbed by this little bit of garter stitch. It all depends on whether you are like me and you are a princess and have very delicate skin on your feet, or whether you are a little bit sturdier like my husband that is completely bomb-proof. So to shorten the sock, stop working at any point, work a couple of rows of plain stocking stitch, and then you can go into your toe decreases. You can do this at any point. If you need to lengthen, then you'll lengthen the sock right after this floor tile band. So it's called a floor tile band because they used to like to do alternating bands of mosaic in places. And it was quite common that you'd see that on floors where they didn't have a lot of money to spend on the mosaic, but they wanted a mosaic. So what you'll do is you'll just do stocking stitch after that band until you get to the length you need, and then you can start shaping your toe. The toe itself, the decreases are written in a particular way to give you a particular shape of toe, but you can change that up. So you can do fewer decreases in every pair of rows, more decreases, that sort of thing. And when we get to that part of the pattern, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But a wedge toe is easy to customize to fit you. I have long pointy toes, so I like to have a longer, narrower toe on mine. And then other people have toes that are quite smooth across the top. They don't have a long, big toe in comparison. And that's where having quicker decreases on a toe can make it a little more comfortable. So that's what's going on page 3 here. The pattern dives in after your abbreviations and stitches into something called special techniques, and there is a stitch pattern here. So the tesserae rib is used in a couple of places in the sock, and this is the pattern for it. So there's a row of knit, a row of purl, and then 2 rows of knit 1, purl 1, and then you go back to the start. So when it tells you to knit 2 repeats of the tesserae rib pattern, this is where it is. It's on page 3. And then the special techniques are how to do the twisted stitches in the sock. So I wanted to do a little bit of demonstrating on how to work those, just in case somebody hasn't run into them before. It's written out for you, but some of us need to see that. So I'm going to show you that right now. So I have a nice little swatch here, and I've done it in a larger yarn so that it's a little easier to view. And they're actually quite nice because they sit up higher on your garment or item than doing them as a 1x1 cable. If you really hate doing twisted stitches, you can cross them like a little cable, but they don't pop up off the surface of the fabric quite as well as a twisted stitch does. So the right twist is very, very easy. What you're going to do is you're going to put your needle in 2 stitches at the same time, and you're going to knit them, but you're not going to pull the stitches off the left needle. So you're going to have a stitch that you've made, knitting the 2 together. Let it be a little bit loose, because then you do a lot less fighting with it when you go to slip them off the needles, and they sit a little bit nicer on the surface of the fabric. Then you're going to insert your needle in the first stitch as if to knit, and knit a stitch. And at this point, you pull both of them off the left needle. And now you have your twisted right leaning stitch. So I'm going to do that again. We'll separate them up with a couple of stitches. So again, to do a right twist, we stick the needle between or through 2 stitches at the same time as if to knit 2 together. For heaven's sakes, camera. Well, I guess it's handy right now. You're going to knit, but you're not going to take either of those stitches off. And I tend to hold them on there with a finger. I knit as a flick knitter and probably, I guess, English style. If you're continental knitting, you can still hold them with your finger and keep them on that needle. Give it a little bit of slack so that it's easy to work with and it sits nicely later. The needle goes into the first stitch and you're going to knit that, and now you pull the 2 off the needle. The left twist is just a tiny bit more fiddly. The left twist, what we're going to do is slip a stitch to the right-hand needle as if to knit. Then we're going to do that again with the second one. So they're now twisted on the needle. Then you're going to put them back onto the left-hand needle. And these instructions are here in the pattern. And let's move it so that this zoom in here is visible. So you've got your 2 slips knitwise, put them back on the left needle. Then you have to knit into the back of the second stitch on the needle. So your needle goes through the back. Do not pull that off the needle. Then you're going to knit through the 2 of them. And here's where you drop them both off of the left-hand needle. And make sure you don't pull these super tight, because again, you want them to have enough slack so they can sit up above the fabric. So let's do that again. So you slip one knitwise, slip one knitwise, put the two of them back onto the left-hand needle. You don't turn them or anything like that because you want them twisted. Then you're going to knit into the back of the second stitch on the needle. And what I find to get that through there is tip the needle on the left back. So it's kind of at a 90-degree angle to the other one, and that helps the right needle to pull that stitch through. Then you're going to knit the two of them together and drop them off the left needle. So if you tip that back like that, it's easier to get that bit of yarn through that nice, nasty, tight little gap. I'll show you that again. It's just a little trick that I use that I came up with on my own to make this easier, because if your knitting is fairly tight, which it is in a sock, pulling that through is hard. So we put that needle in, we knit, and then tip that one on the right back because it helps to open up that hole. So you can see how that actually just sort of pulled the whole stitch through there. And then knit the two together and drop off the needle. So on the left twist, you're knitting through the back of the stitch. On the right twist, you're knitting through the front of the stitch. There's another interesting little thing in order to try and remember what you're doing. If you're knitting the right twist, your right-hand needle points to the right when you go to start it. If you're knitting the left-hand twist, your needle will point to the left. And this, by the way, is a trick that happens with make one left and make one right as well. If you're making one right, the needle will work to the right. If you're making one left, the needle points to the left. So that's twisted stitches. So those are here on this page, and they have a nice written out bit here. You can find YouTube videos for this, but you know, obviously, if anyone has any difficulties, just contact me and I'm more than happy to help. And I will send you tiny videos of things that you need to see if necessary. So now I have to fix this idiot camera again, because apparently it's got some sort of nifty feature that I've never seen before. Of course, you're going to be that way. It's going to make me do all of this switching of cameras in order to fix the zoom. Okay, but I'm going to have to figure that out later. Okay. Always funny. You think you've got all the technology completely figured out, and then they change the software, and all of a sudden, boom. All right, now we're zoomed out again. Hopefully I don't do what annoys it that causes a problem. Okay, so when we get to the sock proper, we have cast on with a stretchy cast on of your choice. You can do any cast on you want for this. You can cast on with a long tail over 2 needles, and I know that Patty Lyons would hate me for this, but I do that all the time, and it is still very elastic. What it does is it gives you a bit of a ruffled edge on the sock, and I actually do that quite often because I like the look of it. You can also use various different versions of the long tail. So there's, you know, a twisted German and so on that have more ease. You could do some of the magic stretchy ones. It doesn't matter what you do. You're allowed to use any stretchy cast on that you like, and then just join, making sure not to twist. So I just want to mention that there is no specific cast on mentioned because many, many, many ones will work for your sock. It is important that there be a lot of stretch in it so that you can get it on over your leg. You don't want any binding up there. And then we work through the leg. The first part, it just tells you to go and do a setup round and then work 2 repeats of tesserae rib pattern. And that's why I pointed out that it's on the other page. It's an old style of writing patterns that's still around today, and it's just the way we go. Sizes small, medium, and large. After we've knit those 2 repeats of the tesserae rib pattern, we are going to do 2 more rounds, and on size extra large, we're going to actually add a stitch. So that's going to bring us up to the number of stitches that we need for the next section in the sock. So these ones, we're all just happy. Size XL, what we're going to do is we're going to knit a round that adds a stitch, and then we'll knit the second round. Rows 1 and 2 are knit and purl. It's the same thing. It's just that we add a stitch in the extra large. The mosaic key band is then knit with a chart, but there are also written in here as well. So let's have a quick look at that chart. And I'm going to give you a little tip for knitting mosaic in the round as well. You'll notice on the charts there are colored lines. If you want to print this and your printer doesn't do color, then what you can do, this is what I do, is I just take a ruler and I actually just make a line at the end of the chart on each side that tells me where I'm supposed to stop. So 2 sizes knit to the red row here, or the red line, and 2 sizes knit to the blue. So that fits in there. So my trick add something on there, or you could put a piece of highlighter tape, or you could put a highlighted line on it, whatever you want, but just it's helpful to make sure that you can tell which is the stopping point for your size. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of help with mosaic in the round. It's actually very easy. So this is a swatch that has 3 repeats of this particular chart. And you can see that there is a little bit of a float in a few places because you're skipping 1 stitch in places in the chart. It's not a lot of a float, but there's a little trick to make sure that it doesn't pull too tight in there. And I wanted to show you that. When you're reading these charts, I have charted both rows of mosaic. Some designers don't. I like to do that because it helps to remind me that 1 row is knit and 1 row is purled. So I've chosen to do garter stitch mosaic for the sock and in the shawl. And so here we have this row is knit, this row is purled, this row is knit, this row is purled, and then some of the stitches will be slipped, and in all cases, they're slipped with the yarn in back. If you're purling, you will have to move the yarn to the back of the needle when you slip the stitch, and then bring it back to the front of the needle in order to do your purl row. So that's just something to watch out for. If you get the slip in the front and you come along the next row and you realize you've made a boo-boo, there is a way to fix it. So I'll show you that as well. Even though it's a swatch in the flat, I'm going to twist my colors when I change color because I've come to the beginning of a row, and I'm actually going to work row 11 here. So row 11, and there's a floppy thing there. We just tighten that old strand up. And the reason why we pull the strand when we get to the start of each row is just to tighten that stitch at the beginning in the previous color that had gotten a bit loose. So I'm moving this so I can see it better. So we've knit 2, then we slip 1, then we knit 1. Spread the stitches out on your needle. This will help you to get a little bit of ease in the float that goes behind there. So you're skipping a stitch, you want them spread out as they would normally sit in the work. And what you're looking for is just a tiny little bit of a smile in terms of giving it a little bit of a slack. So it's kind of a Mona Lisa smile, just a little bit of an arch. That's enough slack that when we go along and we work with the sock later and we go to put the sock on our foot, we don't end up with something pulled super tight because it's easy to pull it tight. So we don't want it to look like this where the stitches are bunched together. We want it to look like this where they're spaced apart. If you get it tight, you can easily just solve it by pulling it out, pull the stitches apart, and you'll get a little bit of slack, and we're back to having our Mona Lisa smile. So just get to the end of this, slipping a stitch, and I always spread my stitches as I go to make the next one. You'll note that I have stitch markers here, and I highly recommend putting stitch markers in between each repeat. You will want a different stitch marker that marks the beginning of your round. It lies madness if you use them all in the same color because it's really easy to get confused about where the beginning of the round is. If you're in the mosaic, you can find it because that's where your other color will be hanging out. Do not ask me how many times I've done that, and I've been knitting mosaic for decades, and I still sometimes forget that sort of thing. So we'll just come along and we'll do some more where we slip, knit 2, slip 1. Now we go to knit the next stitch, space your stitches out on the needle. You can check it by just moving your needle forward and seeing that you've got a little bit of slack there. Slip the next stitch, spread the stitches out, and then you can go along and finish your repeat. So you'll get into a rhythm of just spacing those stitches every time that you go to slip a stitch. Mosaic is kind of interesting, and again, we spread them out because technically you only ever slip a maximum of 3 stitches. And that is a nice little thing about mosaic in that you are not carrying long, long floats, and you'll notice we're only working with 1 color at a time. The ridge is formed by working the same color all the way back to the original place. So in a sock, you're going around back to where you started with the same color, with the other color rather. So 2 rows of each color, and we're just slipping stitches to form the pattern and having a little wee bit of slack on the back side. All right, so mosaic is quite easy. This is not a full mosaic lesson. I've got a lot of information about knitting these exact same mosaic charts in the Roman Villa shawl zooms, which are on our YouTube, because we did a KAL with that one. So there was a lot more detail on how to knit the mosaic. So if you have never knit mosaic, that's a good place to go and look because we will talk about mosaic in more detail. But it's different from the shawl in that these are knit in the round. So the chart itself will look a little bit different because the shawl is knit flat. So you're going back and forth and doing a few different things in terms of how you're maneuvering your yarn. The technique, though, with spreading those stitches out and just slipping the stitches marked with a V is exactly the same. The twisting ribbons chart looks a little bit different. So just to make the right twist and left twist a little easier to see, I have colored the right twists blue in the chart and left twists yellow. They were supposed to be in the key, and I have no idea why it's not showing up, because when I look at this PDF previously, we had colored the key as well, but I just want you to be aware that the right ones are blue and the left ones are yellow. You can tell by the symbol that it's a right twist because the lines in the symbol, the two big lines, will go to the right, and in the left ones, the two lines go to the left. This symbol is also used at times for a cable, and it is the same thing where you are crossing stitches over each other. It's just in the twisted stitches, the stitches are twisted on the needle, which makes them sit up higher. So again, if you really, really hate the idea of knitting those twists, you can do them as a 1x1 cable, and it's not going to be a problem. It just doesn't pop on the surface of the fabric quite as well. So the way that these pop up nice and high here, they'll just sit down a little bit slower and they'll be just a tiny bit less noticeable, but I give you permission to turn them into cables. And again, watch out for your sizing. So here we have, going to the red is actually size small and size extra small. Going to the blue is your size medium. Going to the green is your size large. And it tells you how many times to repeat the chart around your sock. So just explaining the chart layout here and the fact that you have your twists in there and that they're colored. Now we have a question in the chat: how did I get my mosaics jogless? That is my trick of twisting the colors every time I come to the beginning of the row. So I am knitting 2 of the dark color in this row. When I have done row 1, I will come to the next one and I will twist that dark color underneath the other color so that they're twisted together, and then go ahead and knit. And the crossing of the strands when you twist them and then give them a tug actually helps to pull it into a straight line. So it's slightly off. There is a slight jog that you can just barely see, but it really does help to minimize it by doing that twist. So it fills in any holes and it pulls it very close to being in line. So it's a nifty little trick that I do in the round that gets rid of the jog. And I do this in any sort of color work where I have a jog that's going to form and I'm doing lots of colors off and on, changing them. So it's one way to do it without the slipping the stitches and doing all that kind of fancy stuff that will get rid of the jog. You can see it most in this row here. And then where I'm twisting the 2 colors together, it disappears. So the first one, there's a little bit of a jog, but it disappears after because of that twist. So if you know it, you can see it a little bit, but it's just such a neat trick when you're doing mosaic in the round. And I use it all the time if I'm changing colors in something that I'm doing in the round. So if you're knitting a cowl and you're going from one color to another, twist them, and that will help to pull those stitches a little bit tighter in that area and get rid of that jog. All right, the birds chart. Nothing unique about this one again. Again, we have different places to stop based on your size of sock, and the instructions will tell you how many stitches that you need. So it'll have you either knit two together or knit front and back to increase 1 to get to the right number of stitches to work your charts. So again, on the key, we have the sizes and the color there so that you know where to go to on your chart. I'm going to jump back in the pattern because there's some other things I want to draw your attention to. And this is the page here where we have, you're working your twisting ribbons, and then you'll notice sizes small and extra large. On the last row, we're just knitting it. Size medium, we're doing a knit front and back, knit to the end of the round, and that's because we're bringing the size back up to the proper number of stitches for the next part. Size large, we're actually decreasing a stitch in that last row to get it to the proper number of stitches for the next chart. And then after that, you'll just purl around. So I put the increase and the decrease 1 round before the end of the twisting ribbons because it's less likely to be seen. So that's why it's there. You can put it anywhere you want. You could move it to that last purl row, but it's least visible when it is done as it's written. So little tweaks that because I don't want to see little things like that where I'm tweaking the number of stitches in the leg of my sock. And later on, even I myself am going to have a very hard time finding where I have changed my stitch count. In the birds, you're going to knit the birds. And again, at the end of having knit the birds, there's going to be some instructions on how to do the last 2 rows, which follow the chart. So small and medium, nothing happens. You're just going to do your knit row and purl row. It gives you a stitch count. Just double check them, but you should be fine. Sizes large and extra large, you have to add a stitch. And that's just to get you back to the right count once you're done the mosaic birds. Now, the next part that we come to is the heel flap. And the heel flap is kind of interesting because what we're going to do is we're actually going to rotate around the sock. It takes the start of your round and it puts it on the back of the leg. So you'll find that the first row is a little bit weird because you're going to slip a bunch of stitches, the number depends on the size, and that's going to rotate you around. So you're just in the round, you're slipping them to the right-hand needle. Don't worry, it's as if you hadn't knit them because you're going to change colors. And that's going to rotate your sock so that we get the birds, a pair of birds centered on the front of the sock, and it puts your start of round where there's a little bit of a seam effect on the back of the sock. So it just is a little bit of a customization that makes the sock look nicer because there was no way to put 3 pairs of birds exactly centered when we first started without making the chart a lot harder to read than it was. So I just wanted to do it that way to make it easier for you. So you're going to slip some stitches when you go to begin your heel flap. Then you will start knitting with your contrast color, which is the light one. You will place a marker for an instep stitch. You will knit a certain number of stitches, place a marker for the other side of your instep, knit to the next marker, which is your start of round, remove the marker, and then you knit to the next one and you're going to turn, and that's where you start your heel flap. So that all sounds really complicated, but trust the pattern. What it's going to do is it's going to bring the start of the heel flap not here, but over here. So it just moves it, and that center seam on your sock is now also centered on the back of your heel flap. And then you're just going to work your heel flap with a slip stitch the way that most heel flaps are worked. If you wanted to substitute and do like a bird's eye or something like that, you can. I went with the easiest version because it is nicely textured and it allows you to easily do some striping on here. Very, very easy to get where the stripes are incorrect. So make sure you check how many times you repeat each pair of rows in your heel flap. And if you want to lengthen your heel flap, the best place to do it is to add rows in the here and here so that you keep your stripes nice and simple. You could make the stripes longer, but it starts to get, yikes, mathematical. So why might you add lengthen to your heel flap? You'll do that if you have a really high instep or if the person you're knitting for has a really high instep because you'll get more ease over the arch of the foot there. It won't be pulling and straining over their foot where your ankle turns. So adding some stitches there can make it better for a high instep. If you're the opposite and you have a really low instep, a flat foot, and you find that this heel flap is too long and it gets saggy across your ankle, then what you can do is decrease. Don't put as many rows in there. And it absolutely doesn't matter. You can do this in any sock with a heel flap. If you are going to decrease the number of rows in your heel flap, again, do it in the light color because, again, it's going to be least visible. And then you'll work your heel turn. You won't have changed the number of stitches. You'll just have lengthened the heel itself or shortened it. When you go to work the gusset decreases, if you have added extra stitches, you will just keep the decreases going until you get down to the right number of stitches for the size of sock you're knitting. If you have reduced the number of rows, then you will not do as many decreases as in the size, but the pattern doesn't specifically tell you how many decreases to do because that allows you, the way it's written, it has instructions that will allow you to tweak the height of your heel flap and not go, oh my goodness, this is a problem. So you can change that, you can customize it. You can also make the heel flap less stitches across if you're a more experienced knitter, but unless you are, leave it alone, but you can tweak the top of it. And then one other, well, there's actually several other little tips I want to put in here. One other tip is that heel flap socks will often get a hole in the sock where we have the gusset. So it'll be right down here and right down here. If you pick up an extra stitch or 2 stitches in that area, you can help fill in the hole so you don't have to go back later and sew it in. And this sock has 1 picked up in each corner. When that happens, that adds on an extra pair of decreases later on. No big deal because you can decrease as far as you want with this sock. So picking up an extra stitch or 2 in that gap when you have picked up along your heel flap is a nifty thing to do because, like I say, it gets rid of the hole. And you can see there's no hole in the gusset here. This is a point of strain, so having an extra stitch or 2 there definitely does help a lot. Now, one tip when you are doing the heel flap here is before you go to pick up your stitches, which you are going to pick up on the side of the flap weave your ends in first, because what's going to happen with the stripes is that you're going to have a loose stitch here because you have broken the thread every 2 rows, every 2 pairs of rows, and that's a little bit annoying to try and pick up in because now you're getting this big loose floppy thing. So what I do is I weave in those ends into the heel flap first, and there is a neat little trick that will help you with that. And that is, if this yarn was one of my ends, what I would do is I would take my needle and I would go underneath the first stitch beside my heel flap, and then I would go around it like that. So you're sewing a loop around that one little stitch, and then you can weave it through across the row. If you do this, then it can't pull loose again. It can't pull your end out. So that is a nifty little trick that I use in something like that to just make sure your end doesn't pull back out when you put the strain on it while you pick up those stitches. When you pick up along the side of the heel flap, as you can see on this one, you're going to pick up both sides of the slip stitch. That means you don't get a hole along the side of your heel flap. If you pick up one, you get a hole, you can deal with it, but what you would have to do is knit through the back of that stitch to twist it. And that's actually kind of an interesting and pretty look. So it's a way to get a little bit of a decorative line along the side of your heel flap, but you're usually best off picking up both stitches or both legs of the slip stitch, because that makes a really nice solid edge. For those who are comfortable in doing it, you can also have fewer ends to weave in by carrying your stripes up the side of the sock heel flap. And I've done that here. And the way to do it is that every time you come to the beginning of the row, you are going to twist the strands. So you can see this one has a row of twisted strands here. They sit nice and flat against that. It's very difficult to, again, demonstrate when I only have an hour, but it is something that you can do on the flap. So this one I didn't. So I carried one so that I would have it to compare, and the other one I had to weave in all the ends instead of carrying the colors up the side of the flap. It absolutely doesn't hurt to carry the colors up, and you have fewer ends to weave in. You only have the end where you started, not the end where you start and broke on each set. So this one had twice the number of ends to weave in, but I didn't have to worry about twisting all these together. So totally up to you as to what you do. It's just something that you have full permission from me to do, and that works quite well. So if you hate weaving in the ends, the heel flap is the worst part of this sock because there's a lot of them. Okay. I have one other thing I'm going to show you guys because we had a question about that before we got started, but I just wanted to make sure that we went through here and you have your heel turn all written out. If you turn your heels differently from the way that I've done it here, go for it. Makes no never mind to me. The gusset, there are some hints here. It reminds you, for example, to pick up in your slip stitches going through both loops, so you don't have to remember everything we said today. And then it says pick up 1 to 2 additional stitches to prevent a hole forming. If you hate that, don't do it. You will have ends that you have to weave in that you can use to sew the hole shut. So once we have gotten around picking up, we have done some of our decreases. We will go back to doing this tesserae pattern, but it's only on the instep stitches. Textured patterns on the sole of the foot are really uncomfortable. Plus, the wear of your foot rubbing against them on the bottom will actually cause the sock to wear out faster. So I have stopped that on and only patterned on the instep stitches. And there's some little stripes here. And again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that they are stocking stitch on the foot and garter on the top of the foot. If you have a very tight fitting shoe, you might actually just want to do this as stocking stitch. This is going to be less of a problem because there's not that many raised stitches. We'll get this to change this exposure. So you could eliminate the texture on the instep and just do stocking if you have a really tight fitting shoe that you're worried about. There is a little bit of texture. Some of these are garter on the floor tile band at the top there too. And again, you can do it all as stocking stitch if you prefer. The original in the shawl was done with alternating garter and stocking stitch. And the reason for that is it gives you some pretty visual effects. There is a trick to doing this part here. These are stocking stitch and these stitches are slipped. These are not. When you slip a stitch, it pulls the stitch tighter. So when you work this section, if you don't want it to distort and give you a pulled in section on the band, then what you do is you make these stitches loose on your needle, because then when you block the sock, it doesn't pull in on this area. So it's totally up to you if you want to do that. And it is a little thing that I tend to do because I want the band to be straight, because apparently I don't have enough of a life on my own. But you can also just not worry about it and let it pull in. It can be quite cute. And I know Stephen West used this band in something, and he did not give some extra slack to those. And so it gave a wavy effect. So completely up to you as to whether or not you want to do that. But I just wanted to draw your attention to, if you want this part to not be narrower, shorter than the garter, make sure you have extra slack in those stitches. So you might have to pull them a little bit looser. And again, with the toe, the decreases start after a couple of rows past the floor band for the size knit here, but you will decide on how you want the toe to be done. We see we've zoomed in again, but that's not a bad thing. So you decide how long you want your foot, and then you begin your toe where you need that to begin. So we will jump to, after the geometric flower, which has a chart. And at the back of the pattern are all the writtens. So the geometric flowers, exactly the same thing. It's a twisted stitch, just like you did in the twisting ribbons. And again, they're colored to make it easier to see where the right twist versus the left twist are. And this one actually has in the key that the yellow is the left twist and the blue is the right twist. So no idea what happened to the key on the other chart where that's missing, but wouldn't be a pattern if it didn't have some weird little thing happening. So the floor tile band and the geometric flower, you're going to have things written for each size. And that's because the chart will be placed differently based on the size, because some sizes have more stitches than others. So you will see that you're told to start with the color 5. Then you're going to knit 3 rounds. And then after that, size small, you're going to do this. Size medium, you're going to do this. And it's just because there's more stitches. So there's one chart for all sizes, and then you just have to place a little bit of extra stitches on each side of that chart, depending on the size. I have had some of my test knitters say, tell them, you've got your instep marker, and that's this marker that you're slipping here. Tell them to put another marker after the knit 2, and then you have the chart itself marked off. So this is something that I thought was a smart idea. The pattern doesn't tell you to do it, but you could put an additional marker in there just to mark the bounds of the chart itself. So you would have a marker, knit 3, a marker, knit the chart, marker, knit 3, marker. Just take the markers out, the extra ones you add in when you're done that geometric flowers chart. So nifty little thing to point out there. You can help keep yourself oriented by putting an extra pair of markers in on the sizes that are larger than the size small. Floor tile band, again, you will have slightly different instructions depending on the size. And one thing that I want to point out to those of you who like things centered is that this is going to make you slightly insane, because the socks have even numbers of stitches. That particular chart, in order for it to work correctly, has 35 stitches, which means on some sizes, you will have a stitch of the chart that goes beyond the instep marker. So the last stitch on this sock, the marker was here, and that stitch was finished there. So don't let that throw you. Be aware of the fact that you are going to have some stitches on some sizes fall outside those markers. So you will always begin the chart at the marker, and then you might go beyond it. Anyway, it will tell you in this exactly what's going on. So just wanted to point out it's different for each size. Then when we get to the toe shaping, you have some options here. I put a little contrast toe on just for the fun of it. So if you like it exactly as written, it tells you where to put that. I can't see it there because we've got this weird zoom in. Okay, so once you have 40 stitches on your needles, no matter what size, that's where the little tiny toe goes on. You can stripe the toe with all of the colors if you wanted, so you will have yarn left over from the other colors because there is some margin built in. And you could stripe this toe. Why is it doing this? This is weird. Cameras, I tell you. Anyway, you could put lots of stripes in there. If you were not able to get the floor tile band in because of the issue with the length of your sock, you can put some stripes in on the toe as you decrease it. There's no reason why not. What I would be doing would be twisting in between so that you don't have to keep cutting the color each time if you're using 2 colors to stripe the whole toe. And then again, notice that the way that the toe is done is different for the different sizes. It will tell you which sizes and what to do. And you can change the way the decreases are done to make your toe shorter or longer. So what you'll do at first is you're going to do a decrease row and a knit row and alternate the 2 of them. If you want a longer, pointier toe, just keep doing that longer than the pattern tells you to do. So you would keep on going further. If you want a shorter flatter toe, then what you're going to do is do the decrease row without knit rows in between. So that's just one way that you can tweak it a bit. And we have a great question in the chat, which is the floor tile is stocking stitch on the bottom, and you bet it is. And you'll notice that on here, I did not bother to fix the jog, and that's because my foot is always on top of it. I did twist the colors in between there, though, because it does, again, help with the business of you might get a little bit of a gap, and it just makes that join change between colors a little stronger because you've got a whole foot's weight on there. Your entire body is standing on that. So I twisted in between each of those rows, but I didn't worry about fixing the jog because it's underneath my foot. So let's find that bottom. Why do I keep turning this around? It's obscured a little bit by the ends I've woven in, but you can see a line here that's caused by me twisting the colors in between each row. So it just carries them up and keeps it nice and neat. And then I was doing some weaving ends of ends there. All right, so then the question that we were asked in advance was, what do you do if you have made a boo-boo and you don't have a lifeline in? So I'm going to show you a trick to run a lifeline in a sock that's already knit where you need to take some out. The easiest way to do it is in a knit row. So what we're going to do, we're going to do it right in here. We're going to use as an example an actual row in this sock. And what you're looking for is the knit row where you see the V's. So in a garter band, it will be right above the garter ridge. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our needle and we're going to put it in and catch the right leg of each stitch. So under one, over one, under one, over one. And we're going to do that for each stitch and keep stretching it to make sure that you don't get the wrong leg, and just stop and pause and look at it carefully occasionally. So you can see I've caught the right leg of each stitch. Pull my yarn through. Now I can, if I wanted to, take scissors and cut that off, or I can just rip down, and you have a row of stitches that are sitting on this yarn. It's holding them. So again, let's do this in a different part of the sock. We're going to find our knit row, and we're looking for a V. Turn it right way up. You can do this no matter which way it is. So we're going to look for our V that's above that garter bump. That is a stitch pulled through a purled stitch. We're going to look for the right-hand side of the V. So you can see this quite clearly in the camera, I think. We're going to go under the right leg, over the left leg, under the right leg, and just keep working your way around your sock with your needle. And you'll notice I'm using a bent tip needle, and that actually does make it a little bit easier to do this. So you will get one leg of the stitch. If you guess wrong and you have the left leg of the stitch picked up, doesn't matter. The stitches are just going to be turned on the needle, and you can just fix that when you go to pick them back up off of your thread. So again, these are held, and I can rip down to this part here and not have to worry about it. So you can do it on either side, and you'll have your stitches caught in your thread. You can do this in any garment, any sock, anything at all. You can put a lifeline in after the fact by just looking for that line of V's. The only trick is that you have to find the same line of V's in here. And so we could do this like right under here. We're knitting our cuff. We've got our cuff on the needle, and I want to get rid of some of what's knit above. I can go and I can pick up my right leg of my stitch here. So all you need to do is stay on the same row. Sometimes, whether you like it or not, you're going to catch the stitch from the wrong row. So you might end up with a bit of a jog, and you'll have to deal with that when you go and frog back to it. You might find that, oh, I got one that was too high, or you might find, you might find that there's one that's too low. But this is a really great way to get a lifeline in after the fact. I always say this, but I often forget to do it. But I also will put a lifeline in periodically when I'm knitting something complicated and just leave it there. Get a thinner yarn than the one that you're working with, or even some unwaxed dental floss because it slides out easier, and just leave the lifelines until you know you're fine, and then you can pull them out later. So if I'm doing a complicated brioche pattern, I'll run a lifeline about every 8 rows because sometimes it saves your bacon. And I've had it where I probably ripped out half a shawl because I realized I'd suddenly gotten off. So having those lifelines left in there can be really useful. So I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover on here. Just double checking my notes. Yep. So I'm going to switch back to my in-person video, and then you guys can ask anything you want at this point. So if you have questions that I haven't answered, this is a great time to speak up. And if we don't get any questions, then we can get on with our sunny afternoon and our socks. So is there anything you guys would like to ask?
Hi, Carolyn. You answered my questions as we were going along, so that was great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad I could help. And as always, with any of the patterns that we do these videos for, you can always contact us later and ask us questions. We're more than happy to help. And pretty much all of them are knit by the staff, so we all will have a good idea of what's going on. I know that I had quite a few testers on this sock, and there are a lot of kits out in the collection that were because of staff choices. So Amanda's the one responsible for the neon socks, and oh my goodness, they are so pretty. I am going to be putting them up and showing you some of the other color selections in a soon. I'll do it soon on social media and in the newsletter, so you can just see how some of the other color collections look together. And Amanda went with neon yellow, neon pink, and neon blue, and oh, it's so pretty. And I would never have guessed it would work because I'm not a neon person, but got to admit, it's fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I wish you happy sock knitting, and go out there and enjoy some sunshine. Maybe go out and knit with a friend, and have a fabulous rest of your day. I will do the obligatory Zoom, wave goodbye, and we will have this posted soon.
Thank you so much. You were very clear and gave lots of little tips, and that's greatly appreciated.
Oh, I'm so glad that we can help.
And thank you. I can't wait to have my socks to match my shawl.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have to knit another pair of them so that I can wear the two of them together too. Now I got to do Monument Valley as socks because I'm like, that's too cute not to do. Anyway, thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.